What's up guys, the Snowman here, and today we're going to have some fun with tennis clothing sponsors. So we're going to take a look at the top 100 players on both the men's ATP tour and the WTA women's tour, see which brands are the most popular, Nike, Adidas, maybe we'll give Uniqlo some love, and yeah, let's just dive into some of these neat statistics. So my first graph is a pie chart of the top 100 ATP players and which clothing sponsors they have, all these statistics accurate as of October 2020. Some big takeaways: Nike with the most at 14%, kind of not as high as I thought it'd be. Nike obviously has Rafa Nadal as their legendary ambassador, a few young stars in Andrei Rublev, Denis Shapovalov, Karen Khachanov, but for the most part, the best men's players wear a variety of different brands. You've got Adidas, who has players like Team, Zverev, and Tsitsipas. We'll also see plenty of Lotto, the Italian brand, Lacoste with a couple of huge names, and Novak Djokovic, Daniil Medvedev, Fila, Yonex, Asics, Spanish manufacturer Joma with a nice showing here in the top 100, Le Coq Sportif, worn exclusively by French players like Richard Gasquet and Hugo Humbert, then a plethora of smaller brands rounding things out, the aforementioned Uniqlo, only worn by 2 players in the top 100, so maybe not as prominent as you might think. However, they are 2 marquee athletes in Roger Federer and Kei Nishikori. And one of the more obscure brands I discovered was the leading Hungarian sneaker and clothing chain Dorko, worn by just 1 player in the top 100, appropriately the Hungarian Martin Fucsovics. And the data doesn't change too much then as we go from the ATP top 100 to just the elite of the elite, the top 30, although a couple of things. Number 1, Nike still with the most. Number 2, Lotto falls completely out of the top dogs. It's represented well in the top 100, but Matteo Berrettini, the only Lotto man in the top 30. Instead, Lacoste, which is French by the way, their trademark green crocodile logo. Lacoste jumps Lotto and Adidas for second in the top 30 rankings. Also a quick mention for Fila. You'll see a handful of top players repping Fila, including the diminutive Diego Schwartzman, the not so diminutive John Isner, and Dusan Lajovic as well. And then the Japanese corporation Asics, also well represented in the men's game with great players like Gael Monfils and David Goffin. On to the women now. Let's look at the clothing sponsors for the top 100 players on the WTA Tour. The first thing that jumped out to me is how much more widespread the Nike brand is worn. Only 14% for the men, but for the women, that number shoots up to 21%. So Nike, the premier brand on the women's side. Maybe some of that is because so many players want to be like Serena Williams, who's been a Nike ambassador since 2003. We also see Lotto with 13%, the top player for them, Elise Mertens. Usual suspects, Adidas, Fila, Asics, American apparel brand New Balance with a better showing in the women's game. 6 players in the top 100, including perhaps the most important player for the next 20 years, a superstar who's going to make New Balance a boatload of money in Coco Gauff. Also Japanese company Yonex, the only major brand in terms of racking up both clothing and racket deals. We'll look at some of the racket sponsorship figures in a bit. And very interesting on the women's side too, they've got a couple of players who are sponsorless, so they don't rep any clothing brand. Shea Su Wei and the American Taylor Townsend without a major clothing deal to my knowledge, along with a pair of players who have their own brand entirely. Camilla Giorgi wears outfits I believe that her mother designs and makes for her, and Venus Williams reps her own lifestyle brand named 11. Moving to the WTA top 30 now, you can see that Nike absolutely dominates in terms of representation at the top of the women's tour. In fact, as of October 2020, the top 12 players are all either Nike or Fila, so it's a complete duopoly, Nike nabbing a myriad of Grand Slam champions like Simona Halep, Naomi Osaka, Bianca Andreescu, Petra Kvitova, and Serena. Fila's top 10 players: Ash Barty, Sofia Kenin, Pliskova, and Kiki Bertens. If you turn on your TV and it's a high-stakes women's tennis match, huge likelihood you're going to see the Nike or Fila logo on one of the players. In fact, the last time a women's Grand Slam final didn't feature a player wearing Nike or Fila was back at Wimbledon 2017. That was Venus versus Garbiñe Muguruza. Mugu part of the Adidas 17% in this chart, but again, not much variety for the top 30 women. Now let's put them both together, the top 100 men plus the top 100 women. Nike, Lotto, and Adidas, your top 3. Bunch of brands with just 1 or 2 players wearing their apparel. That's the 21% other. 3% Mizuno. They're another Japanese company headquartered in Tokyo. Again, we see Joma here. I like their logo in the bottom right corner. Kind of looks like a beer opener to me. Definitely interesting findings all around, though. One of the first things I'm drawn to when watching a new player or a player I don't know that well is which logo is on their shirt or dress. So I'm happy I got got a chance to break down these clothing sponsors. Now, along with the clothing sponsors, I also dissected the racket sponsor statistics. So this pie chart here is showing the racket sponsor distribution of the top 100 players on the ATP Tour. The big two racket brands on the men's side, Wilson and Head. Wilson, the American company headquartered in Chicago. Roger Federer, Tsitsipas, and Gael Monfils, the main faces of Wilson. Djokovic, Zverev, Berrettini for Head. Babolat is at 18%, the upscale French sports equipment company. Maybe you haven't heard of Technifiber, another French brand. That's where Daniil Medvedev gets his rackets. But for the most part, there's not too much variation with the racket brand, certainly not as much as there is with clothing. This is the ATP Top 30 racket graph. The numbers are skewed even greater in Wilson's favor here, 47%. Head, Babolat, Yonex. Yonex's cover man for a while now, both in terms of clothing and racket, has been Stan Wawrinka. And shifting to the racket sponsors for the WTA Top 100, now some similarities and differences. Wilson still by far in the lead with 34%, but Yonex just fourth for men, second for the women, 25%. Plenty of premier WTA players use Yonex: Osaka, Belinda Bencic, Angie Kerber. In turn, the Austrian brand Head takes a step back, Dunlop with 5%, and that 1% Snauwert, that's a Belgian-based tennis racket brand. The lone player in the top 100 who reps them is naturally the Belgian Alison van Uytvanck. WTA Top 30, just the four main food groups we've been discussing. Babolat jumps over Yonex, though, when we filter it to the best of the best. Pliskova, Kenin, and Joe Konta all use Babolat, and it's pretty much more of the same as we look at both the top 100 men and top 100 women combined. 92% of the players here using Wilson, Yonex, Babolat, or Head. A sprinkling of diversity, but for the most part, your typical pro tennis player wears Nike clothing with a Wilson racket. Those are the leaders of their respective fields, but very fun to dabble in the business side of tennis a little bit here, because most of these players earn the majority of their salary in annual endorsements rather than on-court winnings, so it's a very important aspect of this global sport that we love. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed some of my findings, found them fun or informational, please subscribe to the Snowman Sports Media for more tennis content, and I'll be back real soon. Thanks a lot. Cheers.